Imagine living in your dream home for over 30 years. Every wall hand-painted with magical murals that told the story of your life. Then, because of greed, it's ripped away from you, just so a spoiled daughter can have it. But what happens when that daughter walks into the dream home and finds it turned into a cold, lifeless shell? This isn't just a story of loss, it's a story of poetic revenge. If you've ever dreamed of justice being served in the most unexpected way, hit that subscribe button and like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments, because today's story isn't just about revenge. It's about turning pain into something unforgettable. Let's dive in. There's a house in my neighborhood that never really blended in with the rest. From the outside, it looked almost like something out of a fairy tale, but not in an obvious way. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dripping with modern glass, steel, or pretentious architecture like the newer homes being built nearby. Instead, it looked cozy. A little cottage-like, with a facade that made you slow down when you walked past, as if your brain was trying to reconcile what you were seeing with reality. The inside, though, now that was pure magic. The first time I stepped into Rebecca's house, I swear it felt like being transported into another world. Every single wall told a story. Literally. From floor to ceiling, hand-painted murals transformed the home into a living, breathing fairy tale. One room had a full mural of Sleeping Beauty's castle surrounded by a lush forest. Another had the vibrant underwater kingdom from The Little Mermaid, colors so bright you'd almost expect to hear Ariel singing from the walls. Even the hallways weren't left untouched. Everywhere you looked, there was some carefully crafted detail. A lantern painted beside a doorframe, ivy creeping around the ceiling, stars twinkling on the high walls of the staircase. Rebecca, the woman who lived there, was an artist in the truest sense of the word. Not just technically skilled, but passionate. Every brushstroke carried a piece of her. She had once been an art teacher, guiding kids with shaky hands and big imaginations. Later, she ran one of those paint and wine studios long before they became trendy, teaching adults to rediscover the joy of creating. And even after she retired, she never stopped painting. Murals, commissions, hand-decorated furniture. Art was simply who she was. To me back then, she was just the nice lady with the magical house. I'll admit, I wasn't always the nicest neighbor. My truck was too loud, and I had a bit of a heavy foot on the gas. She'd complain sometimes, stepping out onto her porch, hands on her hips like some kind of Disney matriarch scolding a wayward kid. I used to roll my eyes, maybe mutter something under my breath. But here's the thing about Rebecca, she never stayed angry for long. One day, I apologized, and instead of holding a grudge, she smiled, invited me inside, and offered me a glass of lemonade while showing me her latest mural. That was the start of our friendship. Over time, I realized something important. Rebecca wasn't just painting walls. She was painting her life. Every mural in that house carried her history, her memories, her dreams. That home was a living diary, every brushstroke inked with joy, struggle, and love. And to those of us who knew her, the house wasn't just a place where she lived. It was a reflection of who she was. She had an understanding with the original landlord, too. He adored the murals. They'd agreed that since it was all indoors and added to the home's charm, there'd never be an issue. She'd been living there since the mid-'80s, and there was even talk, promises really, that one day, the house would be hers. Signed, sealed, no questions asked. But life doesn't always respect promises. The landlord passed away before anything could be formalized. And with his passing came the vultures, his kids. At the time, none of us could have predicted just how much that moment would change everything. For Rebecca, for the house, and for me. Because while Rebecca's home had always been a sanctuary of creativity, love, and community, it was about to become the battleground for one of the most devastating betrayals I'd ever witnessed. Rebecca wasn't the type of neighbor who just waved politely from across the street. She was the type who made sure you never left her house hungry, who remembered the little details you mentioned months ago, who dropped off a plate of cookies on holidays just because. After our little rocky start with the whole loud truck situation, I started seeing her differently. She wasn't just the lady with the murals. She was a person who cared about the world around her, someone who believed homes weren't just bricks and wood but vessels of stories. There were evenings when I'd stop by after work, still sweaty and covered in grease from the garage, and she dragged me inside to show me a new mural she was working on. Her excitement was contagious. She'd stand there with a paintbrush still dripping in her hand, pointing to some tiny detail in a corner, like the way she'd made the light on a painted lamppost glow by mixing 3 different shades of yellow. I pretend to understand all the technical stuff, but honestly, I just liked watching her eyes light up. She had this spark when she talked about her work, like she was sharing a secret world only she could see until the rest of us were lucky enough to witness it on her walls. I think what hit me hardest was when I realized how much of herself she poured into those paintings. The fairy tale castles? They weren't just random. She told me once, almost shyly, that she had always dreamed of visiting Europe but never could. So, instead, she brought the castles to her walls. The underwater scenes? Inspired by her late husband, who had been a diver. Even the forest murals carried pieces of her childhood hikes with her parents. The house wasn't just decorated. It was Rebecca's soul, splashed in color. And that's why, over time, I grew fiercely protective of her in that house. Because I knew what it represented. To lose it wouldn't just be losing a place to live. It would be like tearing out chapters of someone's life story and burning them. But I had no idea then just how soon that fear would come true. The trouble started with a funeral. The original landlord, an older man who had been fond of Rebecca and her artistry, passed away quietly. He had always spoken warmly of her, calling her his favorite tenant. Everyone thought the arrangement about the murals, about her long-term stay, was ironclad. But paperwork is paperwork, and unfortunately, nothing had been signed. Enter the landlord's children. Now, I don't want to sound cruel, but these weren't the type of people who saw value in art or history. They saw dollar signs. Where others saw a unique magical home that had been lovingly curated for decades, they saw opportunity. At first, it was just whispers. Neighbors saying one of the sons had been poking around, taking notes, checking the foundation, things like that. We brushed it off. Maybe they were just being responsible, making sure the property was in good condition. But then came the visit. One of the sons arrived with his daughter in tow. She must have been in her 20s, maybe early 30s, dressed like someone who cared more about Instagram aesthetics than anything real. She walked into that house, and from what I heard, her eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Oh my God, Dad," she apparently gushed. "This is perfect. I need this house." Those words were like the opening gunshot in a war Rebecca didn't even know she was about to fight. The son, suddenly seeing a chance to hand his little princess her dream home, started looking for angles. And unfortunately, Rebecca had one major weakness. She had no formal lease. Decades of trust and verbal agreements meant nothing when greed was at the wheel. The murals, once cherished by the original landlord, were now painted as a problem. The son claimed they lowered the property's value, that they'd be expensive to remove, and that Rebecca had altered the house without proper permission. Total nonsense, but in the eyes of the law, they had just enough leverage to push her out. When Rebecca told me what was happening, I swear my chest tightened. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the very murals they were calling a burden, her hands trembling as she clutched the eviction notice. "It's my home," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I've been here longer than anywhere in my life, and now they want to take it for her." I didn't have an answer. All I had was anger. Hot, searing anger. Because how do you fight greed when it's backed by legal loopholes? The truth is, you can't always win in court. But sometimes, you can win in ways that hurt far more deeply. And though none of us knew it yet, Rebecca's loss was about to become the stage for one of the most unexpectedly satisfying acts of revenge our neighborhood had ever seen. It happened on a Tuesday. One of those perfectly ordinary days that ends up burned into memory for all the wrong reasons. Rebecca had called me earlier, asking if I could help move a piece of furniture she'd been painting. I walked over, expecting another normal afternoon of small talk and paint fumes. Instead, I walked into tension so thick I could taste it. The son was there. You could spot him instantly. Expensive watch, perfectly pressed shirt, the kind of guy who had never lifted a box in his life. Beside him stood his daughter, her phone glued to her hand, snapping photos of everything like the house was some kind of showroom. Rebecca looked uncomfortable, her smile forced as she introduced me. The daughter barely glanced at me, too busy running her fingers along the painted vines on the wall. "This is gorgeous," she cooed. "Dad, look at this room. Can you imagine the Instagram shots I could get here?" I felt my stomach turn. It wasn't admiration. It was entitlement. She wasn't appreciating the art for what it was. She was already claiming it, imagining how she would use it, as if Rebecca's decades of work were just a free backdrop for her curated life. The son smiled, this smug little smirk that made my fists itch. "We'll need to make a few changes, of course," he said casually. "Some of these murals might not be to everyone's taste." Rebecca froze, her paintbrush halfway to the wall. I saw it, the flicker of fear in her eyes. That's when I realized this wasn't just a visit. This was a threat, dressed up as politeness. And his daughter? She just twirled around in the middle of the room, arms spread wide. "I love it, Daddy. I need this house." Her words weren't innocent. They were the death sentence. It didn't take long. 2 weeks later, Rebecca found the letter in her mailbox. I'll never forget the way she looked when she showed it to me. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper steady. Her eyes were red, not just from crying but from the sheer exhaustion of it all. "They're calling the murals vandalism," she whispered. The words made no sense. How could anyone look at Sleeping Beauty's castle and call it damage? How could anyone look at the underwater kingdom she had painted in honor of her husband and label it destruction? But that's exactly what they did. They twisted her life's work into a liability, claiming she had altered the property without written permission, that restoring it would cost money, that her tenancy was void. The worst part? She had no formal lease. Decades of trust and handshakes meant nothing now. I watched as her world collapsed in slow motion. "They can't do this," I said, anger boiling up in me. But Rebecca only shook her head, her voice breaking. "They can. And they will." It was like watching someone get robbed in broad daylight while the police stood by and shrugged. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some people pitied Rebecca. Others whispered about how foolish she had been not to demand a proper lease. And me? I wanted to march over to that smug son's house and give him a piece of my mind. But Rebecca, gentle, stubborn Rebecca, refused to sink to their level. "I won't fight them," she said softly. "If they want the house so badly, they can have it." Her words were calm, but her eyes betrayed her. Behind the acceptance was heartbreak so deep it felt like the walls themselves were crying. The weeks that followed were brutal. I'd stop by her house and find Rebecca sitting in one of the painted rooms, staring at the walls as if trying to memorize every detail before it was taken away. She'd trace her fingers along the brushstrokes, whispering little stories behind each piece. Stories of students she had taught, trips she had dreamed of, moments with her husband she had immortalized in color. "This one," she said one afternoon, pointing to a mural of a glowing forest. "I painted after my mother died. She used to tell me bedtime stories about enchanted woods. I wanted to keep that memory alive." Her voice cracked, and she quickly turned away, pretending to adjust a picture frame. But I could see it, the grief, the helplessness. The neighbors rallied around her as best they could. Some brought food. Others offered boxes and moving supplies. My friend with a guest house offered her a place to stay. We all tried to soften the blow, but nothing could change the truth. Rebecca was losing not just a home, but a part of her identity. Packing up her belongings felt wrong. Every chair removed, every painting taken down left the house emptier, deader. It was like stripping flesh from bone. The night before she officially handed over the keys, I found her sitting alone in the living room. She had a single lamp turned on, casting a dim glow against the mural of a starry sky she had painted years ago. "It's like saying goodbye to a family member," she murmured. I sat beside her, unsure of what to say. There were no words big enough for the injustice. But as I looked at her, something shifted in me. Because while Rebecca may have been ready to walk away quietly, I wasn't. And neither were the friends who cared about her. The spoiled daughter thought she was moving into a whimsical, fairy tale home. But by the time she stepped through those doors, she would find something very different. Something cold. Something dead. And that was when the seed of revenge truly began to take root. I'll be honest. After Rebecca left the house, I half expected her to crumble completely. For days leading up to the move, She was like a ghost. She packed her things with mechanical precision, never crying in front of anyone, but you could see it in her eyes. That hollow look, like she was walking through life on autopilot. Like her body was present, but her soul had been left behind on those painted walls. When she finally handed over the keys, there was this strange silence. No yelling, no fight, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet click as the lock turned for the last time. And that was it. Or so it seemed. Because life, in its strange way, has a habit of opening doors just as others slam shut. A week later, Rebecca called me. Her voice was steadier than I'd expected, even carrying a note of excitement. "I think I found something," she said. I drove over immediately, expecting maybe an apartment listing or some small house she'd reluctantly settle for. But when she showed me the photos, my jaw nearly hit the floor. It was a property in another state, not far, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. And the best part? The ground floor had been built out as a studio space. Not just a spare room with good light, but a real studio. High ceilings, wide open floor, natural light pouring through enormous windows, and even proper ventilation for paints and sprays. It was as if someone had designed the space specifically for her. "Can you believe it?" she asked, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the photos. "It feels like it was waiting for me." For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark return to her eyes. But the decision wasn't easy. Buying a new place meant uprooting her life. Leaving the neighborhood she'd been part of since the mid-80s. Walking away from all the memories, the friendships, the history. She hesitated, torn between clinging to the past and stepping into an uncertain future. That night, she invited a few of us over. We sat in her temporary space, my buddy's guest house where she was staying, and she laid it all out. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted. "What if it's not the same? What if I can't recreate what I lost?" Her voice cracked on that last word, lost. I leaned forward, trying to keep my own anger at bay. "Rebecca, you didn't lose yourself. You are the murals. You're the art. The house didn't make it special, you did. And you can do it again. Anywhere." Another neighbor chimed in, nodding. "That place looks like it was made for you. If you don't take it, you'll regret it forever." Rebecca sat quietly for a moment, her hands folded in her lap. And then slowly she smiled. By the end of the week, the deal was signed. Moving her stuff wasn't easy. Decades of belongings, furniture, canvases, paints. It all had to be packed into storage units until the new house was ready. But there was something different about this move compared to the painful packing we had done just weeks earlier. This time, there was hope attached to every box. I still remember loading up one of the last crates. Rebecca stood beside me, holding a small tin of brushes. The bristles were worn, the handles chipped, stained with layers of color from years of use. She cradled them like relics. "These are the first brushes I ever bought," she said softly. "I thought I'd be burying them with me in that house. But maybe they're meant for a new chapter." Hearing that made me realize something. While the greedy son and his spoiled daughter thought they had won, thought they had stripped her of everything, Rebecca was already rising. They had taken the building, yes. But they couldn't take her talent, her resilience, or her ability to start over. And as we loaded that final box, I caught a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in weeks: determination. While waiting for her new place to be ready, Rebecca moved into my friend's guest house. He had offered it freely, refusing a dime from her, but being Rebecca, she insisted on repaying him somehow. They struck a deal. She would paint a mural in his living room, her gift in exchange for his generosity. It was a small thing, maybe, just one wall in an otherwise plain house. But when she started, it was like watching someone come alive again. Her hands moved with confidence, her brushstrokes deliberate. Day by day, the wall transformed, blossoming into a vibrant scene of wildflowers and rolling hills. The kind of mural that made you feel like you could step right into it. I'd stop by after work, and there she'd be, barefoot, hair tied back, covered in streaks of paint, humming to herself as she worked. She looked happy. Not healed, not yet, but lighter. One evening, as I stood watching her put the finishing touches on a sunflower, she turned to me with a small smile. "You know," she said, "I thought losing the house would kill me. But maybe it's like pruning a tree. Painful at first, but necessary for new growth. Her words stuck with me, because while Rebecca was healing, quietly rebuilding her life, a storm was brewing for the spoiled daughter, who thought she was about to inherit a whimsical fairy tale home. The turning point came one night when my buddy, who had offered Rebecca the guest house, brought out a brand new paint sprayer he'd been dying to test. "This thing is a beast," he bragged, running his hand along the shiny metal. "For passes across a wall, and it's done. Smooth as glass." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to practice on?" He grinned, then paused. His eyes flicked toward me, then back to Rebecca. "Well, what if we use it to, restore your old place before you leave for good?" Rebecca blinked, confused. "Restore?" That's when he explained. See, to house flippers, Rebecca condition meant sterile, soulless interiors. White walls, gray trim, no personality, no life. Exactly the opposite of what she had created. His idea was simple. Strip the murals bare, paint everything in those depressing flipper tones, and leave the house as a hollow, lifeless shell. For the first time since the eviction started, I saw Rebecca laugh. Not a bitter laugh, not a broken one, but a real, genuine laugh. "Turn my house into a flip?" she chuckled. "That's evil." "Not evil," I corrected. "Poetic." Because think about it. The daughter fell in love with the house because of its magic. The murals. The artistry. The soul. Without that, what was she left with? Just another box with 4 walls. Nothing special. Nothing unique. And Rebecca, to her credit, agreed. She wouldn't fight. She wouldn't argue. She wouldn't scream. She would erase her art with her own hands, making sure that by the time the greedy son handed over those keys, the dream his daughter had lusted after was already dead. That night, as we sat in the guest house planning it out, Rebecca leaned back, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. She said, "Maybe revenge really is an art form." And in that moment I knew, this wasn't just going to be satisfying. It was going to be unforgettable. After weeks of icy silence, I finally reached my breaking point. Living with my sister had turned my own house into a war zone. She strutted around like the queen of the castle, giving orders, sneering at me, and mocking every little thing I did. The last straw came one night when she had the audacity to stand in the middle of the living room and announce, "This is my house now. If you don't like it, you can leave." Her words sliced deeper than a knife. My chest burned with a mix of rage and humiliation. I had stayed quiet for too long, swallowing my pride, thinking that keeping the peace was the better choice. But in that moment, I realized she didn't see my silence as patience. She saw it as weakness. I went to my room, shut the door, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I was broken, but because I knew something had shifted. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't stay silent anymore. I wasn't going to argue with her. I wasn't going to scream or beg. No, my revenge would be quiet, precise, and devastating. She had taken everything from me, my peace, my comfort, my dignity. But soon, I would take it all back. And when I was done, she wouldn't just lose the house. She would lose the illusion of control she clung to so desperately. This was no longer about surviving her cruelty. This was about ending it. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calmness in my chest. My sister thought she had broken me, but she had no idea she had just awakened a side of me she wasn't prepared for. I started small, subtle, quiet things she wouldn't notice right away. I went through the house and gathered every important document I could find, bills, mortgage papers, old family records, and carefully stored them away in a safe place. She loved control, but soon, she would realize that the foundation of that control rested in my hands. Then came the social moves. She had made herself look like the victim to family and friends, spinning lies about me being unstable and irresponsible. So I flipped the script. I began calling relatives and neighbors slowly, strategically, and letting little truths slip. I didn't outright accuse her. I simply asked them questions, dropping hints about her behavior. "Have you noticed how she talks down to people?" Or, "I'm worried about how she's been treating the kids when no one's around." Seeds of doubt spread faster than lies, and I could already sense the shift. The fake sympathy she had been bathing in started to dry up. Inside the house, I stayed silent, obedient, even meek. I let her believe she had truly won. She smirked more, mocked me more, grew bolder by the day. But she didn't realize that every cruel word she threw at me was fuel for the fire I was building behind her back. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just surviving, I was planning. And plans, unlike tempers, don't fade. They sharpen. Her downfall wouldn't be loud. It would be slow, calculated, and absolutely undeniable. It started with the little things. One evening, she came storming into the living room, waving a late bill in her hand. "Why didn't this get paid?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I shrugged. "Strange. I thought you were handling everything now, since you're the one in charge." Her eyes narrowed, but she couldn't argue. She had insisted on being the queen of the house. Now she could wear the crown when it burned her scalp. The next day, she hosted a little gathering for her friends in the neighborhood. She thrived on playing the role of the generous, sophisticated hostess. But this time it didn't go as planned. A few of the women she had charmed so easily before looked at her differently. Less admiration, more suspicion. I knew why. My carefully planted seeds had started to sprout. One woman casually asked, "Didn't you move in just recently? Must be hard, managing someone else's home." The smile on my sister's face faltered. She laughed it off, but her eyes darted to me, sharp and suspicious. Later that night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "What did you say to them?" she hissed. I blinked innocently. "Me? Nothing. Maybe people are just starting to notice things on their own." Her jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't used to losing control, not even for a second. That was the crack I had been waiting for. Because once a crack appears, it only takes a little pressure before the whole thing shatters. And I was ready to apply that pressure. It happened at the neighborhood community dinner. She had dressed like a queen, wearing her best dress, strutting into the hall as though she owned it. Her arm brushed mine as she whispered, "Watch and learn. This is how respect is earned." I smiled, biting back a laugh. Respect wasn't earned by force, it was built. And I was about to show her just how fragile her illusion of power was. During the dinner, she bragged loudly about how she single-handedly managed the household, and how some people just aren't capable of handling responsibilities. Her words were aimed at me, her smug little dagger hidden in a fake smile. But then came the moment. One of the women she had tried so hard to impress leaned forward and asked, "So tell me, how do you afford to host all these dinners and keep up with the bills? Must be a lot for just one person to handle." I didn't even have to say anything. I just let the silence drag. My sister fumbled with her glass of wine, her forced smile trembling. Another woman muttered, not quietly enough. Strange how she moved in and suddenly everything revolves around her. Her face flushed red. She tried to laugh it off, but the whispers spread like wildfire. And then the final blow. One of the men asked her jokingly, "So when's your own housewarming party? Or do you prefer living off family?" The laughter stung her more than the words. I could see it in her clenched fists under the table. She glared at me, as if I had orchestrated the whole thing. And the truth? She wasn't wrong. Because the higher she built her throne in public, the harder the fall would be when everyone saw it crumble. And that fall had just begun. The silence in the car on the way home was louder than the chatter at the dinner. I could feel her anger boiling beside me. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. As soon as we walked through the door, the mask shattered. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat, slamming her purse on the table. Sitting there, acting innocent while they humiliated me. "Don't you dare pretend you didn't enjoy it." I didn't answer. I just slipped off my coat and hung it neatly on the rack. The calmer I was, the louder she became. "You wanted this, didn't you? You've been waiting for me to fail. You're jealous. Jealous because I can do what you can't. Because people look at me." Her voice cracked, rage colliding with desperation. I finally turned to her. "No. People don't respect you. They fear you, mock you, and pity you. That's not power, it's weakness." Her face twisted, eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. She stepped closer, trembling with fury. "You think you've won? You think anyone will ever see you as better than me? I will never let that happen. Never." I leaned in, close enough that she could hear the steady beat of my voice. "You don't have to let it happen," I said softly. "You're already doing it yourself. You're destroying everything without me lifting a finger." For the first time, she had no comeback. She just stood there, shaking, her empire of arrogance crumbling brick by brick. And in that silence, I knew the shift had finally begun. The days after her outburst were different. Not because she stopped attacking me, she didn't. But because the world outside our walls started noticing the cracks she couldn't hide anymore. It began with her work. For years she had built her reputation on charm and intimidation, but now, people whispered. She showed up late to meetings, snapped at colleagues, and forgot deadlines. Her once carefully polished image slipped, and for the first time, I heard her phone buzzing with complaints instead of praise. One night, I overheard her muttering in the kitchen, pacing back and forth. "They're turning on me, no, they wouldn't dare. I made them." Her voice was a frantic whisper, but every word carried panic. At home, her cruelty sharpened. She tried to claw back control, barking orders at me, slamming doors, blaming me for her spiraling reputation. But there was a shift now. Her anger no longer cut me. It exposed her. Neighbors who once adored her now avoided her. Friends stopped coming over. Even her closest ally, a woman who used to cheer on her arrogance, sent a carefully worded message saying, "Maybe take some time for yourself. People are talking." I watched as she read that message, her hands trembling. The invincible queen who once mocked me in front of everyone now looked small, fragile, and cornered. She tried to laugh it off, but I could see it in her eyes, fear. Not of me, but of herself, of the world catching on to the truth she fought so hard to bury. And I realized something. I didn't need to strike. Her downfall had already begun, and the cracks were spreading faster than she could patch them. It happened at an event she had been bragging about for weeks. A community gala where she was set to receive an award for her generosity and leadership. The irony nearly made me choke. She dressed like royalty that night, strutting around in a glittering gown, rehearsing her acceptance speech in the mirror. "They'll see who I am," she smirked. "Not that pathetic shadow of a sister, you." I stayed silent, but inside I knew the night wouldn't end the way she imagined. The hall was full, neighbors, colleagues, and even some old friends who had distanced themselves but came out of curiosity. When her name was called, she glided onto the stage, head high, smile sharp. For a moment, she looked untouchable again. Then the cracks broke wide open. Halfway through her speech, full of self-praise and fake compassion, someone shouted from the audience, "Funny you talk about generosity when you treat your own family like trash." The room froze. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Another voice followed, louder this time. "I've seen how you scream at her in public. You think no one notices." And just like that, the dam burst. People murmured, stories spilled, and suddenly her carefully built mask shattered in front of everyone. She tried to laugh it off, waving her hand, but her voice trembled. "That's not true, it's lies, all of it." But the audience wasn't buying it anymore. The polite applause that once followed her every word was gone. In its place was silence, thick, heavy, condemning silence. She stumbled through the rest of her speech, eyes darting around the room, searching for allies who weren't there. For the first time in her life, she was alone in the spotlight, not admired but exposed. When she stepped off that stage, she wasn't the queen she thought she was. She was a fraud, naked in front of the world. And I stood in the back, calm, steady, watching her crumble under the weight of her own lies. After the gala, her world began collapsing like dominoes. The whispers never stopped. Her friends, who once clung to her side, suddenly had urgent reasons to distance themselves. Invitations dried up, her neighbors avoided her, and even at the grocery store, people stared but didn't smile. But the worst blow came from her own pride. She couldn't handle being ignored. She thrived on attention, on being admired, and now all she received was quiet judgment. Every glance reminded her of that night when the mask slipped, when the truth bled through. At home, she tried to rage at me, to blame me for everything. But this time I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply looked at her and said, "I didn't need to destroy you. You did it to yourself. All I had to do was let people see who you really are." She froze. For once, she had no words. The silence between us was louder than any screaming match we'd ever had. She stormed off, but I knew she understood. The war she thought she had won was over. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Revenge wasn't sweet in the way I imagined, but it was complete. I had my life back. The house felt lighter, like it was breathing again without her poison in every corner. I rebuilt quietly, piece by piece, no longer in her shadow. And her? She faded. Her voice grew smaller in the community. Her once glittering reputation nothing but ashes. She had burned her own empire to the ground. I walked away free. Sometimes, revenge isn't about fire or fury. Sometimes it's about patience, waiting for the mask to slip, the lies to crack, and the truth to shine through. And when it finally does, that's when the silence becomes the loudest kind of revenge. What do you think? Was letting her destroy herself the perfect revenge? Or would you have gone further? Share your thoughts. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insane revenge stories.